The vastness of space stretched endlessly in all directions. The Galactic Empire, with its many fleets, patrolled the outer reaches of the galaxy, confident that no one could challenge their might. The Empire had seen everything: alien species, rebel factions, even ancient civilizations, but they had never encountered anything like this. A calm, clear day in space turned into a scene of utter chaos when a massive ship appeared on their radar. It was not a typical ship. Its size alone was enough to send waves of panic through the fleet. This was no ordinary vessel. The strange, dark form that came into view had no identifiable markings, no clear origin. It just appeared from the depths of space, as if it had been hiding in the shadows of the universe for centuries. The Empire's command ship, the Imperium, was the first to detect it. Captain Velrix, a battle-hardened officer who had seen countless conflicts, stared at the radar screen in disbelief. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a glitch, but when the ship didn't disappear, his heart began to race. "What is that?" Captain Velrix muttered under his breath, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. His crew remained silent, watching the giant shape on their screens. It didn't look like a normal spaceship. It wasn't just the size, it was the shape, too, a massive, sleek, triangular vessel that seemed to pulse with energy. Its edges glowed faintly, casting an eerie light that bathed the surrounding space in an ominous hue. "Commander, are we sure this is a human ship?" asked Lieutenant Orlan, her voice shaking slightly with confusion and fear. Velrix leaned forward, studying the screen. The Empire had records of human ships, but this was different. "It's not like anything we've seen before, but if it is human, then we're dealing with something far beyond our expectations." The ship seemed to glide smoothly through space, making no attempt to hide. It didn't move with the hesitation of an unfamiliar vessel, but with the confidence of something that belonged there, something that knew it was in control. The Imperium's sensors barely registered it at first, as if it were somehow blocking their scans. This was unlike anything the Empire's technology had ever encountered. "Send a message," Captain Velrix ordered. "Let's see if it responds." The communication officer, a young officer named Jaren, hesitated for just a moment before sending out a standard greeting. "This is the Galactic Empire vessel Imperium. Identify yourself. What is your purpose in this sector?" There was a long silence after the message was sent. The crew of the Imperium held their breath, waiting for a response, but nothing came. No reply, no acknowledgement. The silence in the command deck was suffocating, as if even the ship itself was holding its breath. Captain Velrix's hand hovered over the communication panel, ready to repeat the message, but before he could, a strange signal appeared on the radar. It wasn't a response, but it was something more unsettling. The signal wasn't like any communication the Imperium had received. It was broken, fragmented, but clear enough to make one thing apparent. It was coming from the alien ship. It wasn't a language. It wasn't anything the crew could translate. The message was nothing more than garbled noise, sharp bursts of sound and light, coming through their comm systems like static. Yet, despite the confusion, there was something chilling about the way it sounded. It felt almost deliberate. "Is this some sort of test?" Lieutenant Orlan asked, her voice low and nervous. Captain Velrix didn't reply immediately. His mind was racing. He had never encountered anything like this. He had fought in numerous wars, battled against enemies of all kinds, but this felt different. The silence from the ship only deepened the mystery. What was it trying to communicate? Was it hostile, and if so, why not engage? Why hide behind silence? He turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare the fleet. We need to be ready for anything." The command bridge of the Imperium grew tense as the officers quickly moved into action, preparing weapons, shields, and battle stations. Captain Velrix couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Empire's superiority, their confidence in their power, suddenly felt fragile. The ship's course remained unchanged. It was coming closer. It was as if the giant vessel was waiting for the Empire to make the first move. Velrix was growing impatient, but he knew that patience was a luxury in times like these. The decision was made for him when the ship's massive shape shifted slightly on the radar, now unmistakably moving toward them. "Open a channel," Velrix commanded, though he knew it was likely pointless. He wasn't prepared for what happened next. As he stared at the view screen, a strange light began to pulse from the center of the enormous ship. The light wasn't a simple glow, it was alive, flickering with an otherworldly energy. The beams shot out into space, causing a wave of static. "Across the Imperium's comms. Sir, we're losing power to the communication systems," Jaren reported, panic rising in his voice. "The signal is jamming our systems." The once-calm bridge now felt like a battleground, the crew uncertain whether to prepare for battle or to stand down. It was too late to escape, and yet too early to fight. The mystery of the unknown ship was too much. The sense of dread was growing with every second. Was this really a human warship? Velrix could no longer ignore the truth. The Galactic Empire had no idea what was coming for them, and it was coming fast. The strange ship continued its journey toward the Galactic Empire's fleet. The cold void of space seemed to close in around them as it drew closer. Captain Velrix could feel the tension in the air, a weight that grew heavier with each passing moment. It was no longer a question of whether this was a threat, but what kind of threat it could be. He paced back and forth on the command deck, his mind working in overdrive. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself. His crew, once confident in their command over the galaxy, now found themselves second-guessing their every move. There was something about this ship, a presence, an energy that made them feel small. No one on the bridge could remember the last time they'd felt this uncertain. "Sir, the ship is still advancing," Lieutenant Orlan reported, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a hint of fear. "At this rate, it will be within striking distance in less than 15 minutes. Velrix nodded but didn't respond immediately. There was no obvious tactical advantage for the Empire in retreating, but there was equally no clear path to victory. "Prepare for any possible engagement, but keep the channels open," he said, his voice tight with urgency. He had to act, and act quickly. It wasn't like him to hesitate, but this situation was unlike any he had ever faced before. The human warship was different from anything he had ever seen. It wasn't like the enemy ships they had fought over the years, ships that could be categorized, analyzed, and predicted. This one felt alien, not in the sense of being from another species, but in the sense of being from another world entirely. It was as if the ship itself was not simply a machine, but something more, something alive in a way that defied logic. "Do you think it's a trap?" Lieutenant Orlan asked, breaking Velrix's thoughts. He looked at her, wondering if she was considering the same possibilities. "It doesn't feel like a trap," Velrix said, his voice low. "It feels like we're being tested, but by who, and for what reason, I can't say." The seconds passed, stretching out as if time itself was being manipulated by the presence of the alien ship. The Imperium's sensors continued to ping, erratically, the strange interference growing stronger with every passing moment. A low hum filled the command deck, almost imperceptible at first, but gradually rising in volume. It wasn't a sound the ship's systems were making. It came from outside, from the very fabric of space itself. "Captain," said Jaren, his eyes glued to the console in front of him, "I think the ship is communicating with us. It's not just the jamming signal anymore." Velrix stepped forward, looking at the screens. Sure enough, the static had taken on a different pattern. It was like a series of pulses, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Something about it seemed familiar, though he couldn't place it. "It's trying to communicate?" he asked, though he didn't need an answer. The ship had already proven its advanced technology. It wasn't just a ship. It was a message that they hadn't yet understood. "We need to respond," Velrix decided. "Open a communication channel again. This time, try sending something back in a similar pattern. Use a frequency modulation based on the signal we're receiving." The crew worked quickly, inputting the necessary commands to initiate the sequence. They had no idea what they were doing, no clue if the alien ship even had the ability to understand their language, let alone their technology. But it was the only chance they had. They needed to show that they were capable of communication, to prove they were not just mindless soldiers waiting for orders. For what felt like an eternity, there was silence. The bridge crew held their breath, waiting. Velrix clenched his fists, frustration mounting. They had done everything by the book, yet nothing seemed to work. He felt like a piece on a chessboard, waiting for the next move to come. Only he wasn't in control of the game. He never had been. Suddenly, the eerie hum on the deck shifted. The signal came back through, clearer, now almost clear. This time, it wasn't a jumbled mess of noise. It was a deep, vibrating tone that reverberated through the floor beneath their feet, shaking the very walls of the ship. Velrix's eyes widened, instinctively taking a step back. This wasn't just a signal. This was a command. Then, without warning, the massive warship in front of them shifted position. It moved forward, without any visible effort, gliding through space like it was nothing more than a shadow. The force of its movement disturbed the nearby debris fields, sending small asteroids tumbling away as if they were toys. "Brace for impact," Velrix shouted, charging its weapons. The Imperium's shields were raised, but Velrix knew that the human warship whatever it was, didn't operate by the same rules. Their technology was ancient by comparison. The ship in front of them was not just superior in size, it was superior in every way. For a moment, the Empire's crew believed they were done for. The human ship's energy seemed to be charging up, the beams of light intensifying in brightness. Yet, just as the Empire's fleet braced for the worst, something unexpected happened. The ship stopped, dead in its tracks. It hovered in space, almost as if it was waiting for something. Why did it stop? Orlan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Velrix stared at the ship, his mind racing for answers. It's testing us, he said, his voice barely audible. It's waiting to see if we'll make the first move. If we don't, we may still have a chance. But the fear was growing. There was no way to predict the next move. And as they all stared at the silent, looming ship, they knew that the game was far from over. It had only just begun. The silence that followed was deafening. The massive alien ship hovered motionless in the vastness of space, its dark form like an ominous shadow looming over the fleet. The Empire's command deck was tense, with every officer on edge, waiting for something, anything that could tell them what to do next. Captain Velrix could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His fingers were clenched tightly around the armrest of his chair. His knuckles, white from the pressure, were still not getting any response. Sir Lieutenant Orlan reported, her voice strained, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. As she attempted to re-establish contact, the communication channels are still blocked. Whatever this ship is, it's not letting us in. Velrix's mind raced. The presence of the ship alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of his crew. But the lack of communication made the situation even more dangerous. For all their technological advances, the Empire was facing something far beyond their comprehension. The more they learned, the less they understood. We need answers, Velrix muttered under his breath. Prepare for the worst. We cannot sit here and wait forever. He knew that if they did nothing, the uncertainty would eventually tear them apart. The Empire's reputation was built on strength, control, and the ability to act decisively. But here, in the face of this unknown force, they were paralyzed. The human warship, if it was truly human, had become the center of a storm that the Empire couldn't navigate. The crew was growing more restless. Jaren, the communication officer, had switched to a different channel in an attempt to break through the jamming. His face was pale, the beads of sweat on his forehead glistening under the harsh lights of the command deck. It says, if the ship itself is sending a message we can't decode, sir, he reported, his voice shaky. But it's more than just static. There's something else, ... something we can't quantify. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. What did it mean? Was the ship testing them, like Velrix had suggested earlier? Or was it something more sinister? The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, but none more than the captain. There's only one thing we can do now, Velrix said, his voice firm. Prepare. For a tactical strike we need to show force. If this ship wants a fight, we'll give it one. The command deck exploded into action. Officers worked quickly, activating weapon systems and calculating optimal angles of attack. They had no idea how the human ship would react to their show of strength, but they couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. Firing sequence ready, Captain Lieutenant Orlan reported. Velrix nodded, his eyes never leaving the massive warship. His heart was racing, but his mind was clear. The time for waiting was over. They would fight. They had no choice. Fire commanded. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence seemed to stretch on forever. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the fleet's weapons discharged in a powerful, coordinated volley. The beams of energy shot toward the human warship with incredible speed, cutting through space like lightning. They were powerful blasts, designed to devastate any target in their path. But the human warship didn't even flinch. As the beams of energy struck the ship, something strange happened. The beams appeared to dissipate, vanishing into thin air before they could make contact with the target. It was as if the ship itself was absorbing the energy, bending space around it in a way that no technology of the Empire could replicate. Impossible. Lieutenant Orlan gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Our weapons are useless. They're not even making a dent. The crew was stunned, their mouths agape. They had just unleashed their most powerful weapons, and the human ship had brushed them off like they were nothing. The Empire's most advanced arsenal, the culmination of centuries of technological development, had been rendered ineffective in a matter of seconds. Captain Velrix's mind reeled as he processed what had just happened. The ship wasn't just advanced, it was beyond anything they could comprehend. Whatever it wasn't just a warship. It was something else entirely. Something alive, something ... intelligent. The way it had absorbed their energy was like a predator effortlessly swatting aside an attack from its prey. This isn't possible, Velrix muttered to himself, more to himself than to anyone else. We've underestimated them. He turned sharply to his second-in-command. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to get away from this thing, now. I'm not going to wait around to see what else it can do. But before anyone could move, a new sensation gripped the entire crew. The air on the command deck seemed to thicken, and the hum of the ship's systems became deeper, more resonant. It wasn't a sound, they could feel it. The very fabric of space itself seemed to warp as the human warship began to move. The ship didn't just move through space, it shifted, as though it could manipulate the laws of physics itself. It was as if the entire universe bent in its presence. The Imperium's sensors began to malfunction once again, the readings bouncing erratically across the display. The crew scrambled to stabilize the systems, but it was futile. They couldn't track the ship's movements anymore. It was as if it existed in multiple places at once, defying all logic. Then, without warning, the human warship retaliated. A beam of pure energy shot out from its center, not in a single focused blast, but as a sweeping arc that stretched across space like a wave of fire. The beam hit one of the Empire's smaller ships, the Valiant. Before anyone could react, the ship disintegrated instantly, its hull evaporating into nothingness as the energy consumed it. The crew of the Valiant didn't even have time to scream. The horror that followed was instant. The other ships in the fleet began to panic, their officers shouting orders, but none could escape the inevitable. The human ship had proven its superiority, and it wasn't holding back. Full retreat, Velrix ordered, his voice shaking. He wasn't sure if the order would even be obeyed, but he had no other choice. He knew they couldn't win this fight, not against something like this. As the Empire's remaining ships turned and fled, the human warship remained still. It was as if it had already won, its message clear. The Empire had no place in this part of the galaxy. Not anymore, Captain Velrix could feel the sting of defeat in his chest. His empire had always been invincible, always in control. But today, they had learned something they never expected to know. There were forces out there far beyond their reach. Forces that even the mightiest of the Empire couldn't challenge. And this was just the beginning. The Imperium's remaining fleet limped through space, broken and defeated, its once-proud ships scattering in every direction. Captain Velrix watched from the command deck as the screens flickered with signs of disarray. The crew moved about, in a daze, still processing the events that had unfolded in the last few minutes. Their confidence had been shattered. The Empire had just encountered something far beyond its understanding, and it was clear that the galaxy had changed forever. Stood still, his eyes locked onto the viewscreen. The image of the human warship hovered in his mind, its dark form etched into his memory. Despite everything, he still couldn't comprehend what they had just witnessed. The ship had absorbed their most powerful attacks, crushed their forces, effortlessly, and then did nothing. It hadn't even chased after them. It had simply watched, as if it knew it had already won. Sir, we've lost contact with the Valiant, Jaren said, his voice strained. The communication officer's eyes were wide with panic. The ship was destroyed, and the debris is too scattered for us to recover any data. Velrix's heart sank. The Valiant had been one of the Empire's finest ships, and it was now nothing more than dust scattered across space. A sudden, unspoken realization hit him: there was no victory here. The Empire had not been humiliated, it had been crushed. The human warship had wiped them out without so much as a second thought. What now, sir? Lieutenant Orlan asked, her voice trembling slightly. Do we continue the retreat? What do we do about the rest of the fleet? Velrix turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the command deck. His officers were looking to him for answers, but the truth was, he didn't have any. He had always prided himself on being a man of action, someone who could lead in the toughest of times. But now, even his strong resolve felt fragile. The fleet is in no condition to fight back, Velrix said quietly, his voice laced with frustration. We need to regroup, find a safe haven, but we must also understand what we're up against. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The human warship hadn't fired another shot, but its presence lingered in the back of his mind, like a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. Something was off. Something was far more dangerous than just a powerful ship. It was like the warship had been playing with them, testing their limits before allowing them to escape, and that realization sent a cold chill through Velrix. Want a full analysis of that ship, he ordered, trying to regain some sense of control. Everything we can gather. I need to know how it works, how it was able to do what it did. His officers nodded and began working, trying to piece together anything that could explain the mysterious ship's abilities. The longer Velrix stood there, the more he realized that they were facing something far worse than a mere enemy. They were facing an entirely new kind of threat, one that could annihilate them without lifting a finger. Hours passed. The fleet continued its retreat, drifting through the stars at a crawl. There was no clear direction, no safe place to go. Velrix knew that if the human warship decided to follow them, they wouldn't stand a chance. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't outfight it. The Empire had always relied on its superior technology and firepower, but now they were dealing with something that defied everything they knew. Captain Jaren interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've got something." Velrix turned, his attention immediately snapping back to the communication station. "What is it?" "It's a transmission coming from the human ship, but it's not like anything we've ever heard before," Jaren explained, his hands flying over the console. "It's as if they're speaking, but it's not in any language we recognize." "Play it," Velrix ordered. A low, resonating hum filled the room, accompanied by a strange series of tones that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the Imperium. It was a rhythm, a pattern, but not one that had any meaning the Empire could decipher. It was alien, otherworldly, and yet somehow deliberate. It was as if the human warship was speaking directly to them, but in a way that made them feel insignificant, like they were not even worthy of understanding the message. "Can you translate it?" Velrix asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir," Jaren replied, frustration evident in his voice. "It's unlike any communication we've encountered. It's not even based on sound waves or electromagnetic signals. It's something else entirely." Velrix stood frozen, his mind racing. The transmission was clearly intended for them. It wasn't an attack, but it was no less terrifying. It was as though the human ship had realized that defeating the fleet was too easy. Now it was playing with them, showing them their weakness, demonstrating that they were nothing more than pawns in a game that had already been decided. "We're being tested," Velrix muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Orlin stepped forward, her face pale. "Sir, do you think it's possible that the humans, that they knew about us, knew that we would eventually come?" It was a terrifying thought. What if the Empire had walked right into a trap? What if the human warship wasn't just reacting to their presence, it had been waiting for them all along, knowing they would arrive, knowing they would attack? The implications were staggering. "We don't know anything for sure," said, trying to steady his thoughts. "But we need to prepare for the worst. We can't keep running from this. Whatever it is, it's not over. Not by a long shot." The crew went silent, each officer absorbed in their thoughts. The Imperium drifted through space, no longer the dominant force it had once been. The universe suddenly felt much larger, and the Empire's place in it seemed uncertain. And yet, somewhere in the depths of space, the human warship was still out there watching, waiting, biding its time. The hours that followed felt like days, as the Imperium continued its slow drift through the galaxy, its fleet battered and broken. Captain Velrix remained at the helm, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them providing any clarity. The silence in the command deck was oppressive, as though the entire crew was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing came. The human warship, their would-be conqueror, had not pursued them. It hadn't even fired another shot. It simply let them go, like a lion allowing its prey to escape, knowing full well that it could catch them whenever it pleased. "We're being watched," Velrix muttered to himself. The words felt strange as they left his mouth, but deep down, he knew they were true. The human ship was still out there, somewhere in the vast expanse of space. But now, it felt like it was waiting for them to make the next move. The Empire had always been the hunter, but now it was the prey. The thought gnawed at Velrix's insides. The very idea that humanity, an insignificant, fragile species by the Empire's standards, had brought them to this point was maddening. His pride, the pride of the entire Empire, was on the line. He had never been one to back down, but how could he possibly respond to an enemy that could destroy them at will, without even breaking a sweat? Sir Jaren's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've picked up another transmission from the human warship." Velrix looked up sharply. "Another one," Jaren nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Yes, sir. It's a repeat of the earlier signal, but this time, it's different. There's a pattern, like it's trying to communicate with us on a deeper level." Velrix narrowed his eyes. A part of him wanted to dismiss it as more of the same cryptic nonsense, but another part, the part that was desperately seeking any form of control, wanted to know what the message meant. "Play it," he said. Strange hum filled the room again, but this time, it was different. The tones were more pronounced, more distinct, almost as if they were layered over one another. It was like a melody and alien symphony that felt both alien and familiar. The vibrations seemed to resonate within the walls of the ship, like a call from beyond the stars. Jaren turned to Velrix, his face a mixture of confusion and wonder. Captain, it's almost as if the ship is speaking directly to us, not just with sound, but with emotion. The signal is affecting the systems in a way we can't fully understand. It's almost personal. Personal? Velrix asked, his heart skipping a beat. He leaned forward, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. What do you mean, personal? I don't know how to explain it, Jaren said, his voice tinged with disbelief. It's as if the signal is probing our minds, testing our reactions. It's not just trying to communicate, it's trying to make us feel something. It's almost like it knows us. The words hit Velrix like a thunderclap. Was this possible? Could this ship truly be more than just a machine? Could it have some sort of intelligence, some kind of awareness that went beyond anything the Empire had ever encountered? It was a terrifying thought, and yet, part of Velrix couldn't help but feel a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the idea. If the ship was intelligent, if it was alive in a way they couldn't understand, then perhaps it was a form of life unlike anything in the galaxy. Could this be a new stage of evolution, a glimpse into a future where humanity, fragile but relentless, had surpassed everything the Empire had ever known? We need to respond, Velrix said abruptly, standing up. Get me a direct link to the warship. Now. The command deck sprang into action, officers moving quickly to relay the captain's order. They had been running from this for too long. Their retreat was not working. The fear was consuming them. Velrix had no more time to waste. This was it, was the moment that would define the future of the Empire. Jaren's fingers flew over the console, and a moment later, the transmission link was established. Velrix's eyes locked onto the screen as the strange signal filled the air once again. This time, it wasn't just noise. There was an underlying rhythm, a deliberate intent. The ship was waiting for them to act. The question was, would they? He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the unknown. This is Captain Velrix of the Galactic Empire. We are willing to communicate. We seek understanding. For a long moment, there was silence. The only sound was the hum of the ship's systems, and even that felt faint compared to the eerie calm that surrounded them. Then the signal came again, a sharp burst of energy, followed by the deep, resonant tones that filled the room. But this time, there was something new. This time, the tones shifted, morphing into words that were not words at all, symbols like ancient runes flashing across the screen. Velrix's eyes widened. This isn't a message, he whispered. It's a test. The runes on the screen pulsed, and a chill ran down Velrix's spine. He had no idea what they meant, but one thing was certain. The human warship had been watching them for far longer than they realized. It wasn't just interested in their technology, or even their ability to fight. It was testing their capacity to understand. Sir Orlan said, her voice low, the ship... It's sending us an ultimatum. Velrix's mind raced. An ultimatum? The human ship was challenging them. He had no choice but to listen. The Empire had always been about domination, about being the supreme power in the galaxy. But now, it seemed, they were facing something far greater. The message came through, clearer than ever. You are not the rulers of this galaxy. You are merely visitors. A test will reveal your fate. Fail, and you will be forgotten. Velrix's stomach churned. The human warship wasn't just sending a warning, it was issuing a challenge, daring the Empire to prove its worth. But what could they do? What could anyone do against such power? For the first time, Captain Velrix felt the full weight of the Empire's arrogance collapse around him. The warning from the human warship echoed through Velrix's mind, reverberating like a haunting refrain. A test will reveal your fate. Fail, and you will be forgotten. The words felt like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down at the feet of the Empire. Velrix, for the first time in his career, wasn't sure how to respond. The cold certainty that had always been his ally was now replaced by something unfamiliar, doubt. We can't just sit here, Velrix muttered to himself, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to his crew or to the silence that had engulfed him. We need to do something. We need to know what this test is, and how we can pass it. Lieutenant Orlan looked at him, her expression torn between fear and resolve. We have no way of knowing what this test is, Captain. Whatever it is, it's beyond us. We don't even know how they're doing this, how they're controlling everything. Velrix turned sharply, his mind still racing. We're not going to sit here and wait to be destroyed. If we fail, it will be because we did nothing. The officers around him were on edge, each of them sensing the gravity of the situation. They had faced battles, sieged planets, fought wars, but this was unlike anything they had ever prepared for. An enemy they could not touch, a force that seemed to bend the rules of the universe itself. It was like fighting a shadow enemy that existed in more dimensions than one. "What do you suggest we do, Captain?" Orlan asked, her voice tight with the weight of responsibility. "If we try to fight, we'll be wiped out. We saw what happened to the Valiant. The Imperium can't match their firepower." Velrix closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The ship was silent except for the soft hum of the engines, as though the Imperium itself was holding its breath. "We don't fight them on their terms, we fight on ours." "What do you mean?" Jaren asked, his voice uncertain. "We don't even know their terms. Their terms aren't about firepower or weapons. They're about understanding," Velrix said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "They want to know if we can comprehend what they're offering us. This isn't a war of technology or military might. It's a war of intellect. If we can pass the test they've set for us, we might be able to survive." Orlan shook her head, still confused. "But how do we pass a test we don't understand?" Velrix turned to the view screen where the dark form of the human warship still loomed, distant yet present. He studied it for a long moment, his mind calculating, trying to read something into the alien vessel that wasn't just mechanical. There had to be more to it, more to this test than firepower. The ship wasn't just sending signals or challenges, it was testing the very nature of the Empire. Its technology, its arrogance, its power. The Empire had always assumed it could bend the universe to its will. But now it seemed the tables had turned. "We're not dealing with a conventional enemy," Velrix said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "This ship, it doesn't just use technology, it embodies it. We've always thought we were the masters of technology, but what if we're wrong? What if this is their way of showing us something we don't understand? This ship isn't just a weapon, it's a mind. It's trying to teach us something." Orlan's eyes widened. "You think they want us to learn?" "I think they want us to adapt," Velrix replied, his voice firm. "To evolve, just like they did. The test isn't about how we fit, it's about how we change." The weight of his words hung in the air. If the human ship had the power to wipe them out without so much as a second thought, it wasn't because it was more advanced. It was because the Empire had lost its edge. The very thing that had once made the Empire unstoppably to adaptability. Its constant push for progress was now its greatest weakness. They had stagnated. They had relied too much on their weapons, on brute force, on overwhelming firepower. The human warship wasn't fighting them with guns, it was fighting them with something deeper, something far more dangerous. "What are you suggesting we do, Captain?" Jaren asked, his voice barely a whisper. Velrix turned back to his crew, his eyes steely with determination. "We stop thinking of this as a war and start thinking of it as a lesson. We need to understand them. We need to learn what they know. Only then will we know how to survive." There was a long, tense pause. His officers were still digesting his words, still unsure of what they meant, but Velrix could see the flicker of realization in their eyes. The Empire had always been the one teaching, the one leading, the one commanding. Now, it was their turn to learn, but would they be able to? Suddenly, the communication panel beeped. The transmission was back, the strange, layered hum, now more pronounced, almost like a heartbeat. It was louder than before, more insistent, and it seemed to pulse. In time with the very walls of the Imperium, Velrix could feel it in his chest, like the ship itself was vibrating in response to the signal. "Captain," Jaren said, his voice barely audible, "they're sending us another message. It's stronger this time." Velrix stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment they would either rise to the challenge or fall, forgotten like so many before them. "Play it." The message washed over them, the hum reverberating through the very core of the ship. But this time, it wasn't just a signal. There was a structure to it, a deliberate cadence, as though it was speaking directly to their very beings. The patterns were unmistakable. The warship wasn't just testing their military might. It was challenging them to evolve, to adapt, to become something greater than they had ever imagined. And Velrix realized, with a jolt of clarity, that the test wasn't about their survival, it was about their transformation. The warship wasn't asking them to fight it, it was asking them to join it on a new level of understanding. The question was, would the Empire be willing to change? Velrix looked around at his crew. They were no longer just soldiers, they were students, about to learn the most important lesson of their lives. The question remained, could they evolve in time to pass the test and prove themselves worthy of the galaxy, or would they be lost, forgotten, as the warship had predicted. The human warship had just given them a choice, to adapt or to perish. And for the first time, Captain Velrix wasn't sure which path they would take. The silence that followed was more profound than anything Captain Velrix had ever experienced. The hum from the human warship still reverberated through the Imperium, but now, it felt like an invitation, a summons to understand, to evolve, or to be obliterated. The weight of the moment was suffocating. The Empire had always been a symbol of power, of control over the galaxy. Yet now, standing in the shadow of this unknown force, Velrix felt as if the very foundation of that power was crumbling beneath him. His crew stood motionless, awaiting his next command. But he knew that whatever action they took now would define them not just as officers, but as representatives of the Empire. The question was no longer whether they would fight or retreat. The question was whether they could adapt, whether they could rise to the challenge and transform, or whether they would be lost in the vast expanse of space, forgotten by history. "We've been given a choice," Velrix said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything they were facing. "This is not a battle we can win with weapons. This is a battle we can only win by evolving. We either learn what this warship is trying to teach us, or we perish." Lieutenant Orlan looked at him, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. "But sir, how do we learn? How can we possibly understand what they want from us? What if we fail?" Velrix looked at her, his expression resolute. "Failure is not an option. We may not understand their technology, their language, or even their motives, but we know one thing: the Empire has always thrived on change. It's time we remembered who we are." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but there was a flicker of determination in their eyes. Velrix's words had stirred something deep within them. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also the legacy of a vast empire, an empire built on adaptability, on progress, on relentless forward motion. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for their very identity. The human warship had been silent since its last transmission, but Velrix knew that the warship was waiting for them to make the next move. There was no going back. The fleet had been given a chance to prove itself not through violence or destruction, but through understanding. And Velrix realized that if they didn't make that leap, they would be lost. "Jaron," Velrix said, his voice carrying a sense of urgency, "is there any way to decipher the patterns in the transmission? Anything that could give us insight into what they want from us?" Jaron's fingers flew over the console, his face tight with concentration. "It's not easy, Captain. The signal is so complex. It's not just a simple pattern of ones and zeros. It's almost like it's alive, shifting with every attempt we make to decode it." "Then let it shift," Velrix said, turning his gaze toward the viewscreen. The human warship loomed in the distance, a reminder of the vast unknown that they were now facing. "We can't approach this like a traditional enemy. We need to approach it with the same curiosity and adaptability that made the Empire what it is." The crew was silent as they processed his words. Velrix knew that there was no turning back. The Empire's centuries-old strategies had no place in a war like this. The battle was no longer one of firepower and strategy, it was one of evolution, of opening their minds to something greater than themselves. The hum of the transmission grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was something deeper, something that resonated within their very beings. Velrix closed his eyes for a moment, letting the strange energy wash over him. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't even an attack. It was ... a call, a challenge. "Do you hear it?" Orlan asked softly, her voice almost reverent. "It's not just a sound, it's like it's calling to us. It's not trying to destroy us, it's trying to ... connect." Velrix opened his eyes, and for the first time he felt something other than fear. He felt the spark of possibility. The warship wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of something far greater. It was an invitation to change, to grow, to become something more than they had ever imagined. "We're not fighting this war," Velrix said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "We're learning from it. We're becoming part of something greater. We have to embrace it." Jaron looked up from the console, his face filled with awe. "Captain, I think I've got it. The transmission, it's not just a signal. It's a map. It's showing us the way. If we follow the pattern, if we decode it, we might be able to unlock what they're trying to teach us." Velrix's heart raced as he approached Jaron's console, leaning over to study the complex data on the screen. The map was more than just coordinates. It was like a blueprint, a set of instructions that would lead them somewhere. "But where?" "The map ... It's showing a path," Jaron said, his voice trembling. "A path we've never taken before. A way forward, But it's not just about survival, it's about transformation. Valrix's eyes narrowed as he studied the patterns. It was clear now that this wasn't just about the Empire's survival. It was about adapting, about evolving into something that could coexist with this new force in the galaxy. The human warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a living, breathing entity. And it was offering the Empire a chance to join it, to become part of something greater than they could have ever imagined. We have to follow it, Valrix said, his voice firm. This is the only way forward. The Empire was never meant to stay the same. We evolve, or we die. The crew was silent, but Valrix could see the determination in their eyes. They had a choice to make, a choice that would define the future of the Empire. They could continue to fight, to hold on to the old ways, or they could take a chance on something new, something that could change the galaxy forever. As the Imperium followed the path laid out by the human warship's transmission, Valrix felt a sense of purpose he had never known. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future, for something that could unite them with forces greater than anything the Empire had ever encountered. And, perhaps for the first time in their history, the Empire was ready to change, ready to evolve, ready to face whatever the future held together.